Hello there, Pastor Blake here, and we're continuing our study of the book of Joshua in chapters 15 all the way through chapter 19. Now, this is a big section, however, it's really one more big thought in a way. It's a lot of the allotments given to the lands and to the people and kind of where their inheritance lies. And so we can use this as kind of one thought, one book, and a lot of it is city names and places and boundary locations. So you're going to need a map. You can Google Joshua conquest, Canaanite conquest, Israel's lands, all that kind of stuff. And they will give you a map that really will show you and help you break down exactly what these chapters are talking about with the city names. There's no way I'm going to read through these names. A lot of them are honestly very hard to read. And so I'd encourage you, if you have like a Bible app, usually they look the ability to name them up, and so you can hear the correct pronunciation of them. And so really, I just wanted to give an overview of chapter 15 through 19, because when it starts off, it's really just talking about Judah's allotment. For instance, in chapter 15, verse 1, it says, "The allotment for the tribe of the people of Judah, according to their clans, reached southward to the boundary of Edom and to the wilderness of Zin, at the farthest south. And their south boundary ran from the east of the Salt Sea, from the bay that faces southward, and it goes out southward on to the extent of the Akribah." And so, as you can see, it's very detailed, extremely detailed, exactly where all of these boundaries were. And when we start into about verse 20 of chapter 15, you can really see just names after names after names. And so I'd encourage you to still read it. It's great information, but I would have a map that lets you understand kind of where these boundaries are, because it really gives you a good visual and helps you understand the concept of what they're trying to get through. And so verses 1 through 12 is just boundaries for Judah explained. Basically, that's all there is to it. And then in verses 13 through 19, it does talk about Caleb was instrumental in conquering the land. We know that. He was given a special place far south in the Promised Land. He gave the chance for anyone who would take over Kiriath Sefer. He would give them his daughter. And so there was a special place. And he said, "Hey, if you'll take this place over, I'll give you my daughter as a thank you for it. Access and as a wife." And so Othniel, who was part of Caleb's tribe, was able to actually take over this land and was given Ashkas as a wife. She was then asked Caleb for a plot of land with a spring on it. Now, when you start reading into Judges chapter 1, not even through the whole chapter, we literally see the exact same story again in Judges chapter 1. Remember, when we look at books of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, they are layered upon different events, and some are written from slightly different perspectives, even though they're technically the same event. Well, obviously, you can't just write in between the lines different events, so they have to do one at a time. And so when you see that chapter 15 is dealing with something that literally chapter 1 of Judges is dealing with, you're talking about linear events, but from different perspectives, written for different reasons. And so you're going to have those, especially in the Old Testament, with stories like that. And so don't worry when you see those. You can compare the notes because it is taken from different perspective. However, in Judges, it does give a little bit more details that right here in verses 13 through 19 of chapter 15 does not give us. And so keep that in mind. But Othniel does actually appear later, obviously in Judges chapter 1 again. But he also appears in Judges chapter 3, verses 7 through 11 as one of the judges. So Othniel is actually one of the judges of Israel that comes up. And so you can read about him a little bit later. Now, interesting, through verse 20 through about 62, really, the almost the very end of the book, you will see the clans of Judah were divided up and given their inheritance, and they were given cities. Now, there's 29 cities at one point, 14, 16, 9, 1, 1, 11, 9, 10, 6, 2, 6. Equaling up to be 114 cities. Now, this is where all the family groups, the specific clans within the tribe of Judah would break out. But how do we know? Why did they do this? Why would they have given us all this information? Well, just like we do, you go down to your records keeping office, or now the internet has plenty of resources. You can tell whose land is who. You can see the boundaries. Well, this is basically what they did. Now, their main influence for doing this was to make sure everyone, obviously, they knew their lands, they knew the promises that God had given them. However, you got to remember, they didn't keep a whole bunch of other records. The Bible was their records. And so even though we see it as kind of an odd place to put it, the holy scriptures of God, well, this is really all they wrote. This is what they kept up with. This is what they kept sacred. And so we look at this knowing that the people of Israel were trying to keep records. They were trying to keep everyone's plans and allotted lands separate to make sure everyone knew where the boundaries were. So we do the same thing. They just put it in the Bible. So we see in verse 63, though, the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem could not be driven out. This would be a problem for Israel later on. Now, you have to remember that. The first part of why they even had the idea of pushing out all these other people groups was because they would start intermingling with them. They would start intermarrying with them. They would start kind of taking some of what God had said and then kind of some of what these people not living for God would say, and they would merge it. And all of a sudden, you got a perverted system that God knew would be a downfall of Israel, which later on does become the downfall of Israel. Israel forgets the Lord their God. They start doing these awful things, these foreign ways of living for a God, and so that is what their downfall was. That's actually why Babylon was able to take them over. You can read some of that in Jeremiah and through the prophets of what would happen if they strayed away from their God. Well, they eventually did. And some of these reasons that they didn't drive all of the people out, they let some of them stay, even though they were kind of put into forced labor, they still let them stay. And they, some of their thoughts behind God and the ways they acted and their morality and everything slightly changed to where God was furious, that he would not have it. So we see that in 15. Judah's allotments, all their cities. We talk about Othniel and Caleb a little bit. 63, the Jebusites did not get fully taken out. So in chapter 16 is a very simple chapter. It's not even really that long at all. It's like 10 verses. We see that in chapter 16, verses 1 through 9, general boundaries for Joseph's lands, which was for his children, Ephraim and Manasseh. You can read that a little bit earlier. But Ephraim and Manasseh were actually Joseph's children, and they were given special place over the firstborn because of Reuben had taken advantage of one of Jacob's wives, slept with her. God did not like that. He was pushed down, not in the first ordered of son status, which is a very big thing. But he was pushed out. And so Ephraim and Manasseh were given the portions for Reuben, and Manasseh, being the firstborn of Joseph's sons, was now put in the firstborn of Israel's sons, kind of an adoption process. And so that's why you see Manasseh actually has two portions, one on the other side of the Jordan and one actually in the promised land. That's why you see the half tribe Manasseh here, but then Manasseh has a completely other allotted land on the promised land side of the Jordan. And so that's kind of where you get that half tribe Manasseh. It means one half is over here, one half's over there. And so they did get all that kind of land. And in verse 10 you see, however, they did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer. So the Canaanites had lived in the midst of Ephraim to this day, but have been made forced to do hard labor. And so Ephraim did not drive out all the people, just like Judah did not drive out of the Jebusites. They're using a standard just Canaanites. Sometimes when we're looking in the Bible, Canaanites can be used as anyone who lived in the land. But there's also sometimes it references that Canaanites are an actual people, just like the Jebusites and the Hivites and the just all those. They also will say Canaanites. However, Canaanites can also be used as an idea of anyone just in this land is in the land of Canaan, is just Canaanites. And so, but they did not drive out these people, and so Ephraim actually did not exactly do 100% what God had them do. So in chapter 17, we move on. I know this is a lot of information. However, it's a lot of cities. It's a lot of big details, explanations of where the boundaries of the land are driven. And honestly, that's hard to explain and read through. However, like I said, get a map, follow along. It will help you a lot. And so in chapter 17, we see verses 1 through 2, details about which cities were allotted to Manasseh are given. It actually names very specific cities. And then in verses 3 through 6, the daughters of, we'll say the word, Zelophehad, asked Eleazar the priest and Joshua, now Eleazar was the high priest this time, asked Eleazar the priest and Joshua if they would be given their appropriate allotments. Now, this is the daughters of this guy, okay? Now, I'm going to put the scripture references down below in the description. However, Numbers chapter 27, verses 1 through 11, and then Numbers chapter 36, 1 through 13, talk to you why all of a sudden these daughters of Zelophehad, something like that. This is why these daughters of this guy is just asking for these allotments. If you go back and read Numbers chapter 27, 1 through 11, it will actually tell you why these daughters had an allotment given to them. It's actually very fascinating. It's good detail. And then in Numbers chapter 36, verses 1 through 13, it shows you why daughters, in general, female heirs, could actually be given some of this allotment. So I encourage you to go back and read that. And so we have these daughters coming up. They're asking, hey, well, we want our allotments that we were promised. And so, hey, give them to us. And they refer back to the Numbers thing. They will be in the book of Numbers, and they will be able to explain a little bit more of why they were given this opportunity. And so in chapter 17, verses 7 through 11, we see a detailed description about the allotment boundaries are given, just to explain, hey, this is where your allotments are. So here's all of the stuff on the map. You can see in a map, they'll help you with all the city names. In verses 12 through 13, the Canaanites were strong enough to resist being pushed out of the land. They dwelt in the land and later were forced into labor by the Israelites, which would cause them problems later, just like we've said before. If you look at verses 12 through 13, yet the people of Manasseh could not take possession of their cities, but the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. Now, when the people of Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not utterly drive them out. They were supposed to kick them completely out of their land, even though they were doing forced labor and kind of had them under control. That was not what God had commanded them. God had commanded them to push them out of the land, kill them, destroy them, let them run, whatever. Get them out of the land, because if you do this, if you keep them in there, they're going to cause you to turn away from the Lord your God. And we know later on in the Bible, they actually did. And so, but they were a strong people. They were able to resist Israel, and so Israel just kind of let them stay. Not a good thing. However, you see in verses 14 and 18, 14 through 18, the people of Joseph, which is Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph, spoke with Joshua about needing more land. Hey guys, we need more land. We got a lot of people. And Joshua gave them advice about taking over a forest area belonging to the Perizzites and the Rephaim. So we see that Joseph's people needed more land. Ephraim and Manasseh go to Joshua, the leader, say, hey, we need more land. Joshua said, hey, well, there's no one has conquered the forest area up there, so why don't you go conquer that and you can have all that land. Well, they tried to do this. These two people groups were strong and had iron chariots, but people of Joseph were able to conquer them. Now, we will see in the very beginning of Judges chapter 1, actually, you can jump ahead. I haven't got the verses for you, but Judges chapter 1 actually talks about other people with chariots of iron that the people were not able to take over. But Ephraim and Manasseh, they actually were able to take these people over. And so chariots were able to take over at one point. In another place, some of the land, the people kind of gave up too quick, I guess, and weren't able to take them over. However, this was a foresty area, so it would have been a weird place to battle for them. However, they were able to do this, and they were able to conquer them. So that's chapter 17. Now, if we go on to 18, I know this is fast, but remember, this is a lot of just allotments. And so chapter 18, verses 1 through 7, really, the people assembled at Shiloh and set up a tent of meeting there. Even though they had conquered most of the land, the people were not moving in to take possession of it. Joseph decided to take 3 men from every tribe to scout out the land to create a map of the area. Joseph would then know how to divide up the land and portion each part for an inheritance. And that's exactly what they did. They took 3 guys from each of the tribes. They said, hey, go out there, survey the land, kind of help me get some ideas where some boundaries, natural boundaries were, some cliffs or some mountain ranges or some water, some maybe rivers we don't know about, the forest areas. Let's make sure we understand where this land is, what our general area is. So then, making boundaries, making allotments, giving the inheritances away is going to be much easier. So we'll know kind of an idea of what the land is like. And that's exactly what they did. Verses 8 through 10, we see 3 men from each tribe did what Joseph asked, which is, back in Moses' day, people really didn't do what Moses asked them all the time. But Joshua had a much better time with people, which is an understatement, which all what they have went through. It's amazing he got them to do this, but we do see verses 8 and 10 through 10. They did do this. After they returned, Joshua cast lots before the Lord and divided up each tribe their inheritance. So he did what he had told them he would do, as long as they did what he told them to do. And so they did this. They started casting out and doing these allotments. And this is really where a lot of the allotments start as far as the inheritance being given. And all through the rest of chapter 19 it even happens. And so verses 11 through 28 of chapter 18, we see Benjamin was the first of the lots to come up. They cast lots, they cast these things, and then Benjamin came up. Hey, it's my turn. And so Joshua started giving them the details and the cities of which they were to go and possess the land. A detailed description of the boundaries were given. 14 cities were given to Benjamin. And as soon as we get right into chapter 19, after that, we see that Simeon was the next to take up the lot, came up by lots. Their land was in the middle of Judah because of such a large inheritance was given to Judah. And also Judah and Simeon were actually brothers from the same mother. And so they kind of were, they were siblings. Hey, have your land together. You can hang out, have some barbecues. I don't know if they had barbecues, but the verses 1 through 9 of chapter 19 was Simeon being given up the allotment. And if you do look in a map, Judah is kind of all around Simeon. It has like this kind of circular area right in the middle of Judah. And so then after that, it kind of moves pretty quickly. In chapter 19, verses 10 through 16, is Zebulun was a portion their inheritance, and the description followed. In verses 17 through 23, we see Issachar was a portion their inheritance, and a description followed. In verses 24 through 31, Asher was a portion their inheritance, and a description followed. Verses 32 through 39, Naphtali was a portion their inheritance, and description was followed. And so it's a lot of reading, but I encourage you still to read this. Get a map out. Keep doing it. And then verses 40 through 48, Dan was a portion their inheritance, and a description followed. And verses 49 through 50, after the allotments were finished, the people gave Joshua an inheritance. Finally, the leader gets something. They gave him the city he asked for, which was Timnath Serah, located in Ephraim. And so if you go to look at the land of Ephraim, you will see where Joshua was actually given an inheritance himself. Hey, thanks for doing all this. Thanks for being the leader. It hasn't been an easy task, but here's an allotment for you to have your own land. And he actually asked specifically for a very specific city, and he was given the city. And so he could go out and make his own, have all of his family live, his people live, and they had a city. And he picked it, not really a good reason exactly why he picked it, just he had it on his mind. There was obviously some resources there that he saw potential in, and so he took it. And so then in verses 51, which is actually a big old verse in the very end of chapter 19, we're going to read it here. It says, "These are the inheritance that Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun and the heads of the fathers' houses of the tribes of the people of Israel distributed by lot at Shiloh before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting." So they divided up, dividing the land. And so whenever we look at this, what was happening at first, back really, in 17 or 16, in 15 with Judah, we see all of this, they're starting to just allot all this in land, all this inheritance. They're going back, they're telling you all the cities, all these places. They're labeling, they're counting them. And at the very end, just how we do a sign off for thanks, blessings, we appreciate it, P.S., whatever it is, at the end of letters, at the end of anything, emails, they do kind of the same thing. They do a closing. Hey, these are the inheritance that Eleazar and Joshua they gave to the people of Israel. And so this is where they divided it. They divided up in Shiloh. And so they're kind of giving a little bit of an end piece to this kind of cap. So, hey, if you're reading through there, hey, where was this stuff at? If you're reading scrolls, you have discrepancies, you can see these kind of markers. Oh, all of the inheritance are right before this. And so they would be able to see kind of through a scroll, oh, okay, this is where it's at. They can find the information. That's kind of why they would use a system like that. We use basically the same system, just in different ways. However, chapters 15 through 19 is a lot of the allotments. Like I said, I encourage you to get a map. It's great information, great examples of organization, and also this stuff kind of keeps the peace also around camp life and being able to help people understand where their boundaries are. This is where your family should go. This is where your families go. There's no discrepancy. There's no fighting because it's all written down. We do the same thing, and so all the allotments are kind of done away with, are finished at this point, and in the next video we'll cover chapters 20 through 22, talking about the cities of refuge. Stay tuned. Blessings.